Superhero movies were once untouchable. Avengers Endgame made nearly $3 billion. Even the Justice League, despite being a mess, pulled in over $600 million. But today, one bomb after another. The Flash, Ant-Man 3, the Marvels all ended up as massive failures. So, are we witnessing the last days of the superhero genre? Let's start with the beginning. The year is 2007, and Marvel decides to take several massive risks. First, they decided to adapt their Iron Man character, who was fairly unknown amongst the general population, which was risk number one, considering the main hero movies being released about that time were all based on very well-known heroes, like Superman, Batman, or the Fantastic Four. On top of that, Marvel decided to hire an actor who was on the blackest of lists in Hollywood due to his behavior, Robert Downey Jr. Add to this a mostly unfinished script that was basically modified day by day in the trailers of Jon Favreau, the director, as well as Robert Downey Jr. himself, and Jeff Bridges. All of this made the movie seem like it was doomed to fail. Yet, the exact opposite happened. The movie was a massive success, earning almost $600 million on a budget of $140 million. Following this, the entire superhero genre as we know it, and, in fact, the entire Hollywood movie industry was about to change forever. Instead of making standalone films like X-Men and Spider-Man, Marvel introduced the shared universe concept, teasing the Avengers in Iron Man's post-credits and bringing Tony Stark into their next film, The Incredible Hulk. And just like that, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the MCU, as you all know it, was born. Seeing how much fat cash this was making Marvel, DC was close to follow. After Christopher Nolan finished his much-appraised Batman trilogy, he was presented with the idea of doing Superman next, which he politely declined to direct, passing the torch right on to his friend, Zack Snyder, who basked in the idea of doing something with his character, and very soon, the DCEU and all of its glory was birthed. However, instead of going slow and steady, developing each of the characters through phases and their own movies, DC and Zack Snyder decided that pulling out the big three immediately, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, was the best thing they could do, and the pony that would end up winning them the race. However, this did not work out as planned, and the DCEU started falling apart almost before it even officially began. A little of it was due to constant studio interference, but perhaps an even bigger problem was that the characters simply weren't given enough time to make the audiences care for them, or those versions of them, shall we say. Despite all of this, the movies were still making a lot of money, maybe not as much as DC and Warner Brothers were expecting, but they were still raking in a heavy profit, so nobody in WB and DC thought it would be necessary to change their approach. Marvel, on the other hand, was growing and exploding at such an alarming rate that it was unclear whether they would ever even stop, or just continue going up forever. However, they did indeed reach the top, and unfortunately, after that, the only way was down. After Marvel released the culmination of all 20-ish MCU movies that destroyed the box office and became a global phenomenon in the shape of Infinity War and Endgame, of course, things were never looking better. Everyone was super excited as to what was gonna follow this amazing conclusion to a saga as epic as the Infinity Saga was. Meanwhile, at this time, despite their underwhelming cinematic universe, DC was flying high. Wonder Woman was a highly praised movie that made more than $800 million at the box office, and Aquaman was the first DCEU movie to cross the $1 billion mark. The first nail in DC's coffin actually came immediately after the release of Justice League. Originally meant to be directed by Zack Snyder, the Justice League was supposed to be this big, dark, epic that would finally see the team on the big screens for the first time ever. However, after a personal tragedy, Zack Snyder had to leave the project, and this is where everything went south, and the entire DC fanbase was effectively divided in two. Joss Whedon came in, and instead of doing everything he could to salvage and finish the project, while trying to stay as close to Zack Snyder's vision as possible, he opted for reshooting a big chunk of the movie, completely changing the script and almost entirely switching up the art direction the movie was headed in. On top of this, Henry Cavill, who played Superman, was contractually obliged to have a mustache because of a different project, which led to Joss and his team having to do CGI over almost all of Henry's reshot scenes, which basically led to him looking super goofy for almost all of the film. This prompted the fans to respond by wanting Zack Snyder back at the helm of the universe, and some other fans wanting the DC management to stay clear of him, claiming that his movies were way too dark and serious. DC, Having been left without a clear idea and identity as to where they should take their universe forward, we're in a little bit of a pickle. After Avengers Endgame, Marvel was on top of the world. It had just pulled off the biggest cinematic event of all time, and fans were eager for what came next. But instead of carefully building a new saga, Marvel flooded the market with rushed, uninspired content, and the cracks started to show. Unfortunately, right around at this time, a certain thing was happening globally which made the movie theaters, well, a lot less accessible, shall we say. That prompted the entire superhero genre to enter the Dark Ages. Possibly the worst place you want to be as a company that is helming a cinematic universe is to enter this type of situation without a clear idea where you want to go with your movies and how you want to take things forward. And both DC and Marvel found themselves in this exact situation. Let's quickly go over a few Marvel Phase 4 movies after 2020 and see why they failed, while simply focusing on the quality of the movies and not on the circumstances because of which fans couldn't go to theaters. Black Widow was simply released way too late for it to matter at all. Eternals tried to introduce 10 new characters at once and no one really seemed to care. And Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness promised a game-changing multiverse story, and instead of that, the fans got cheap cameos that meant nothing. Then came the Disney Plus era, where Marvel continued to make mediocre show after mediocre show, and their projects really stopped feeling essential and started feeling like side quests, and the audience slowly but surely started losing interest. In the Infinity Saga, every movie mattered. In Phase 4, most of it felt optional, and once people realized they didn't have to watch everything, they mostly just stopped watching at all. Another major problem was that Marvel never truly established a new central villain. Thanos had been the core of the Infinity Saga for a decade, but Phase 4's supposed big bad, Kang the Conqueror, was introduced in the Loki TV show instead of a major film. Then, when Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania finally gave Kang a proper introduction to the big screen, the movie flopped so hard at the box office and Kang's actor, Jonathan Majors, got himself in some legal trouble, which threw Marvel's plans into total chaos. Meanwhile, DC was doing their own thing, but unfortunately, failing nonetheless. Their first movie after 2020, Wonder Woman 1984, was meant to be a huge follow-up to the first Wonder Woman, but instead, it was a disjointed, over-the-top mess that killed any momentum the franchise had. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad was critically loved and has a load of die-hard fans, but failed at the box office due to the fact that they released it on HBO Max the same day, making only $168 million worldwide on a $185 million budget. Then came Black Adam, The Rock's attempt to reshape the DCEU around himself, which underperformed horribly, making just $393 million worldwide on a $200 million budget. However, by far the biggest flop during the DCEU era was The Flash. It was supposed to be their No Way Home, a grand multiversal event bringing back Michael Keaton's Batman, but due to terrible CGI, no clear stakes, and Ezra Miller's off-screen controversies, it became one of the biggest box office bombs ever, losing over $200 million. These horrible strategies culminated with DC straight up canceling a fully finished movie, Batgirl, and some sort of change was absolutely necessary. So what was next? After their fair share of flops and controversies, the future finally started looking bright for both DC and Marvel. Having realized that they have insanely popular heroes who are begging to be utilized, which was further proved by how successful the Batman was, DC decided to ditch the disjointed approach, and they hired a man to helm the universe moving forward, James Gunn.
Nice.
He scrapped most of the previous actors, even doing something as extremely controversial as firing Henry Cavill as Superman and bringing David Corenswet on instead. He created a clear-cut plan, deciding to do something that had never been done before, which was to make a full-fledged mix of live action and animation, creating one big universe and finally merging DC animation and live action, which have been their own things in DC for so long. Marvel, on the other hand, had finally gotten a clear vision of where they want to take the MCU post the entire Kang controversy, hiring Robert Downey Jr. as the next big bad, Doctor Doom, and finally bringing some of the most famous Marvel characters into the MCU, such as the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. So, is this the end of superhero movies? Not really. It would seem that the last of the days of superhero movies are yet to come. Just when the superhero genre was looking to be fully on the decline, both Marvel and DC seem to have finally gotten their plans together, and the future for both of these massive franchises is looking very bright. Whether they succeed or not, only time will tell. One thing's for sure, the superhero genre isn't dead, but it is fighting for survival. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.